Sean Diddy Combs.
Sean Diddy Combs.
Sean Diddy Combs. I remember he's behind bars at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn waiting for his trial to get started next year in May. He's been detained for 2 months on charges of trafficking and racketeering, which he's pled not guilty to. Chloe Malas is following this for us.
Sean Diddy Combs' lawyers tried for a third time to persuade a judge to let the hip-hop mogul out of jail while he awaits his trial with $50 million bail. But a decision won't come until next week, as prosecutors warned of his concerted effort from behind bars to disrupt the case. We've got all the key updates from the courtroom, including details on Diddy's behavior and what's next for his legal battle. So keep watching. U.S. District Judge Arun Subramanian said he will issue a ruling on Sean Diddy Combs' bail request after both the defense and prosecution submit letters by noon on Monday, detailing their arguments from the 2-hour hearing in Manhattan federal court. Combs' lawyers proposed allowing him to await trial under 24-hour surveillance, either at his mansion on an island near Miami Beach or, after the judge dismissed that option, at an apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Their $50 million bail offer, secured by his Florida home, essentially amounts to house arrest, rather than keeping Combs in the troubled Brooklyn federal jail, where he has been held for over 70 days since his September arrest. Under their plan, Combs would be under strict restrictions, only allowed to communicate with his legal team. However, prosecutors argued that no set of bail conditions could address the risk of obstruction and dangerousness that Combs presents. They claimed he has repeatedly violated jail rules while at the Metropolitan Detention Center, allegedly attempting to interfere with witnesses and influence the jury pool. Really, this amounts to the defendant paying his way out of custody, Assistant U.S. Attorney Christy Slavic told the judge. In response, Combs' defense attorney, Anthony Rico, rejected the prosecution's characterization of Combs as a lawless person who doesn't follow instructions, or out of control, calling it inaccurate. Tini Geragos, another of Combs' lawyers, argued that with the strict release conditions they proposed, it would be impossible for him not to follow the rules. Combs, 55, has pleaded not guilty to charges that he coerced and abused women over many years, using a network of associates and employees to silence victims through blackmail, violence, and threats. His trial is scheduled to begin on May 5th. 2 prior judges have determined that Combs would pose a danger to the community if released, and last month, an appeals court judge denied his immediate release while a panel of 3 judges from the 2nd U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals reviews his bail request. Friday's hearing marked the 2nd time Combs appeared in court this week. On Tuesday, a judge blocked prosecutors from using documents seized from his cell during a jail-wide sweep for contraband and weapons. As Combs entered the courtroom through a side door, he waved to his family, including his mother and several of his children, sitting in the gallery. He placed his hand over his heart and blew kisses before embracing his lead attorney, Mark Agnifilo, and taking his seat at the defense table. Combs appeared in court without handcuffs or shackles, dressed in a beige jail uniform. At times, he pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket to review documents in front of him. Prosecutors argued that, while incarcerated, the I'll Be Missing You singer has used social media to try to sway potential jurors. They claim he's attempted to leak materials he believes would help his case and has been reaching out to potential witnesses through third parties. Simply put, the defendant cannot be trusted, Assistant U.S. Attorney Christy Slavic stated. In an effort to strengthen their argument for his release, Combs' attorneys worked to downplay the potential impact of a key piece of evidence. A 2016 video that shows him hitting and kicking his then-girlfriend R&B singer Cassie in a hotel hallway in Los Angeles. Prosecutors allege that the assault took place during a freak-off, an event where Combs allegedly used his power and prestige to coerce female victims into drugged and highly produced sexual performances with male sex workers. Combs' defense team, however, argued that newly discovered evidence disproves these claims and that the video, first aired on CNN in May, merely provides a minutes-long glimpse into a complex but decade-long consensual relationship between Combs and Cassie. In response to the defense's claims that the video had been manipulated or taken out of context, Slavic told the court that the full version was not available because Combs allegedly paid hotel staff $100,000 to make the original video disappear. "This is a case about violence," Slavic said in her final plea to keep Combs in custody. "The defendant has engaged in physical, sexual, and emotional abuse of his romantic partners for years." After spending 2 months at the Metropolitan Detention Center, this will be Combs's third attempt to secure his release, following previous bail denials. So, what's at stake for the former music mogul, and what arguments can we expect to hear from both the prosecution and defense? Combs's legal team will likely emphasize the similarities between his case and that of Michael Jeffries, the former CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch, who was indicted on similar charges. Despite facing charges of running an international sex trafficking ring, Jeffries was granted bail with a $10 million bond and strict conditions, including home detention and GPS monitoring. Diddy's lawyers argue that given their similar wealth, influence, and the nature of their charges, Combs should be granted similar consideration. They propose a $50 million bail package with home confinement, 24/7 monitoring by private security, and strict visitor logs. However, prosecutors are expected to argue that despite these measures, Combs presents a unique risk. They will likely point to his history of manipulation and the possibility that he could influence or intimidate potential witnesses or jurors. His ability to manipulate even a secure environment with private security is a critical point they plan to emphasize. Prosecutors have consistently argued that Combs poses a significant threat to society, particularly to potential victims and witnesses in the case. They cite his previous actions, including his arrest with drugs in his possession, and stress that he has a history of using his power and influence to intimidate others. This, they argue, makes him a risk even if granted bail with security measures in place. One of the most significant pieces of evidence the prosecution will highlight is the 2016 video showing Combs allegedly assaulting his then-girlfriend R&B singer Cassie Ventura in a hotel hallway. Prosecutors claim that this incident, part of a broader pattern of abusive behavior, provides crucial context for understanding Combs's violent tendencies, which they argue are linked to the charges of sex trafficking and racketeering. They'll also point to other evidence, like text messages between Combs and Cassie, where he allegedly threatened to leak explicit recordings unless she complied with his demands. The defense, on the other hand, is working to downplay the significance of this incident. They argue that the video only shows a domestic spat, and that the couple's relationship, while toxic, was not indicative of the broader criminal activities Combs is accused of. They also claim that text messages between Combs and Cassie have been misinterpreted, presenting a misleading narrative of abuse. In federal sex trafficking cases, there is often a presumption that the defendant should remain in detention before trial, given the severity of the charges and the risk of flight or reoffending. The burden of proof is on the defense to counter this presumption, and so far, Combs's legal team has struggled to provide convincing arguments that would convince the court to release him. Still, the new judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian, could view the facts differently than previous judges. Since he's not bound by past decisions, Combs's team is hopeful that he'll give weight to the argument that his case differs from others, particularly in how he is treated compared to Jeffries. Another key concern for prosecutors is Combs's alleged use of social media to manipulate public opinion and influence potential jurors. They claim that while incarcerated, Combs has orchestrated online campaigns to sway the court of public opinion in his favor. Prosecutors believe he's tried to leak materials to support his case and reach out to potential witnesses through intermediaries. The defense, however, maintains that these claims are exaggerated and points out that Combs has complied with jail rules. They also argue that he has taken steps to mitigate any potential interference, such as agreeing to the terms of home confinement and having his communications monitored. In the ongoing legal proceedings, there are several important considerations that will determine whether or not the defendant should remain in detention while awaiting trial. The prosecution is pushing for pre-trial detention, citing evidence that suggests the defendant is a flight risk and a danger to society. However, there is still much debate about how strong the evidence truly is and how much the prosecution needs to prove to justify keeping him behind bars. One key point raised by the defense is that the prosecution's case for detention relies on allegations, not concrete proof. The prosecution has suggested that the defendant has been contacting witnesses and victims, potentially obstructing the investigation. However, the defense argues that they have not demonstrated any clear or threatening behavior. The defense even claims that one of the witnesses actually reached out to the defendant first, not the other way around, and when the defendant learned that the individual was a grand jury witness, he allegedly stopped communication. The prosecution, however, has presented recordings of phone calls from the defendant, which they claim show him abusing his communication privileges in jail. These calls, they argue, were used to contact witnesses and victims in the case, with the defendant allegedly using his family to carry out his bidding. While these phone calls are considered fair game for the prosecution, some of the material from his jail cell, such as evidence marked as legal and potentially implicating attorney-client privilege, is being contested. A particularly notable phone call, partially redacted in the prosecution's filing, is said to involve the defendant instructing his son on how to reach out to others in the case. However, the judge seemed concerned about the use of legally privileged materials and was visibly upset about the search of the defendant's cell. Despite these concerns, the prosecution maintains that they have the recordings and that these conversations are enough to demonstrate the defendant's attempts to influence witnesses. An important aspect of the proceedings tomorrow will likely center around the defendant's alleged efforts to obstruct justice by contacting witnesses and victims. The defense claims that the government has mischaracterized these contacts and that no intimidation or obstruction took place. They also point out that some of the contacts were made after the witness was already served with a grand jury subpoena. The prosecution, on the other hand, argues that the defendant's repeated contact with witnesses, particularly after they had been subpoenaed, shows a clear attempt to influence their testimony. Adding another layer to the prosecution's case, they allege that the defendant has been using his family to run a social media campaign aimed at influencing potential jurors. They claim that posts surrounding his birthday, where he allegedly communicated with his family, were part of a broader effort to sway public opinion and influence a future jury pool. The defense, however, counters that there is no explicit restriction on the defendant or his family posting on social media. In fact, the defense suggests that such posts, while potentially damaging to the defendant's reputation, are not inherently illegal. The defense is also questioning the credibility of the prosecution's claims, noting that the prosecution's case is built largely on phone calls and witness testimonies that may not be as clear-cut as they appear. They argue that while the prosecution is attempting to paint a picture of a defendant who is actively trying to manipulate the investigation, there are many gray areas that could complicate the judge's decision. Ultimately, the defense contends that without more concrete evidence, it would be unfair to keep the defendant in detention for an extended period before trial. What's clear is that the judge has a difficult decision ahead. The evidence presented by the prosecution suggests that the defendant is trying to influence witnesses and obstruct the investigation, but the defense counters that these actions have been misrepresented and that the contacts may not have been as sinister as portrayed. With the stakes high, next proceedings will likely shed more light on whether the prosecution's case is compelling enough to keep the defendant behind bars. Back in late September, Sean Diddy Combs was denied bail for the second time and remains in federal custody. The hip-hop mogul has been behind bars since his arrest Monday night at a Manhattan hotel. He had hoped to be released and await his sex trafficking trial from the comfort of his Florida mansion, but his request was rejected. A judge, U.S. District Judge Andrew L. Carter, ruled against Combs' proposal, which included a $50 million bail offer, GPS monitoring, and strict visitor restrictions. The judge deemed these measures insufficient to ensure the safety of the community and the integrity of the case. Judge Carter sided with prosecutors who argued that no set of conditions could prevent Combs from threatening or harming witnesses, a key aspect of the charges against him. This marked Combs' second unsuccessful attempt in as many days to secure his release from the Metropolitan Detention Center, where he has been held since pleading not guilty to charges. Since his arrest Monday night at a Manhattan hotel, Combs has been in federal custody. His initial bail request was denied by a federal magistrate on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, he failed to convince Judge Andrew L. Carter, who will oversee his trial. Combs's defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, plans to appeal the ruling to the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in hopes of securing Combs's release. In the meantime, Agnifilo is pushing for Combs to be moved from the dangerous Brooklyn Detention Center to a facility in New Jersey. However, Judge Carter noted that decisions regarding inmate placement are entirely up to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. "I'm not going to let him sit in that jail a day longer than he has to," Agnifilo told reporters outside the courthouse. Combs is facing serious charges in an indictment, which accuses him of using his power and influence to coerce women and male sex workers into participating in drug-fueled, highly orchestrated sexual performances known as freak-offs. These events, sometimes lasting for days, were allegedly recorded by Combs, and both he and the victims were sometimes given IV fluids to recover. The indictment further claims that Combs used a network of associates to assist in his abuse, employing blackmail, kidnapping, arson, and physical violence to silence his victims and prevent them from coming forward. In a bid to keep Combs behind bars, prosecutor Emily Johnson argued before Judge Carter that the once-celebrated rapper has a long history of intimidating both victims and witnesses of his alleged abuse. She pointed to text messages from women who claimed that Combs forced them into participating in freak-offs and then threatened to release videos of them. Johnson also criticized Combs's defense team, accusing them of minimizing and horrifically understating his tendency toward violence. She took particular issue with his lawyer's description of a 2016 assault at a Los Angeles hotel as merely a lover's spat. If Combs had been granted bail, his defense team proposed that he remain confined to his home, with visits limited to family, property caretakers, and friends who aren't considered co-conspirators. After prosecutors revealed they had executed a search warrant on Combs's private security chief, his lawyers offered to hire a new firm to monitor him and ensure he adhered to the proposed conditions. Judge Carter remained unconvinced, dismissing the proposal as an allegedly foolproof system. If convicted, Combs faces a mandatory 15 years in prison with the possibility of a life sentence. For the first time, it seems like Diddy is starting to realize he might not be able to talk his way out of this situation. The thought of possibly spending years, maybe even decades in prison must be weighing heavily on him, and it likely contributed to his emotional breakdown in court. For someone who's always lived like royalty, the idea of being locked up in one of the country's most notorious detention centers is absolutely terrifying. Concerns about his life in jail are growing by the day. High-profile inmates like Diddy face a unique level of psychological pressure when they enter the prison system. While he's always lived a life of luxury, that also means he's been constantly under the public's watchful eye. Every move he made was scrutinized, celebrated, or criticized. With an entourage, devoted fans, and an enormous fortune to cushion any backlash, he's always had a buffer. But now, all of that is gone. It's not just about being physically alone. It's like losing everything that once defined him, as he sits in a stark cell with only his thoughts for company. That isolation must feel suffocating. It's no wonder authorities are keeping a constant watch on him. They're worried he might harm himself. Things are looking bleak for Diddy at the Metropolitan Detention Center, one of the worst jails in the country. The conditions there are brutal. Hygiene is nearly non-existent, with inmates often going days without any way to clean themselves. The cells are freezing in the winter and unbearably hot in the summer, not to mention the frequent power outages that plunge the place into total darkness for days at a time. Can you imagine being trapped in a freezing cell, shivering under a thin blanket, with nothing but cold concrete and steel surrounding you? It's a total nightmare. On top of that, MDC is notorious for overcrowding, packing inmates into tight spaces beyond its capacity. There's no privacy, no room to move, and you have to stay on edge all the time. For someone like Diddy, who's used to the luxury of his mansions, this cramped environment must feel absolutely suffocating. Right now, he's in solitary confinement in the Special Housing Unit, the section reserved for high-risk inmates. This isn't just any part of the jail. It's where they keep the most dangerous individuals. A man who once lived in a $48 million mansion is now stuck in a tiny 6-by-9-foot cell, smaller than most closets. He spends 23 hours a day in there, with only a steel toilet sink combo, a small desk, and a thin mattress for company. His personal belongings, just a single blanket, one uniform, and a few commissary items. It's a far cry from the life of luxury he once knew. And while he wasn't shackled, he was wearing a khaki prison jumpsuit, a constant reminder of how far he's fallen from his once unimaginable wealth. Solitary confinement means he gets just 1 hour outside his cell each day, and it's only to a small enclosed yard. No interaction with other inmates, completely cut off from the outside world, except for the guards who keep watch. On Friday last week, Sean Diddy Combs appeared in court for the third time as his legal team fought for his release from jail. The issue at hand was bail, a matter being considered by Judge Aaron Subramanian. This was the first time this particular judge had heard arguments regarding Combs's release, after bail had been denied on 2 prior occasions. Based on the defense's arguments and the prosecution's response, it appeared that the judge might be leaning toward granting bail. The defense highlighted the strict nature of the bail conditions they were proposing, which they claimed would be more stringent than the conditions at the Metropolitan Detention Center, where Combs is currently housed. They emphasized that Combs would not be placed under house arrest in Miami, as some had speculated, but would remain in New York with significant restrictions: no internet, no phone use, and only limited contact with approved visitors, including his attorneys. However, the prosecution strongly opposed the idea of bail, citing concerns over Combs's alleged attempts to influence witnesses and victims, as well as accusations of violent behavior. They argued that he posed a danger to society, making him unfit for release. Despite these objections, Judge Subramanian assured both parties that he would deliberate on the arguments and make a decision by early next week. A key moment in the courtroom was the possibility that Combs could be home in time for Thanksgiving, a timeline that seemed realistic given the judge's tone and the defense's proposal for stringent bail conditions. The defense also suggested a $50 million bail package, which would include private 24/7 security and close supervision. One point of contention during the proceedings was whether Combs would be allowed to communicate via social media, particularly in relation to his family and public image. The court discussed whether posts about his personal life would influence the potential jury pool or affect the case's integrity. The high level of interest in the hearing, especially as it related to whether Combs might be released in time for Thanksgiving. The hearing was held in a new courtroom location, which allowed more people to attend. Among those in the gallery were members of Combs' family, including his children, who arrived together, holding hands. Notably, Combs' close friend, LaWanda Lane, was also present. Lane has been caring for Combs' twin daughters while he's been incarcerated. While Combs' family's presence in court could be seen as a show of support, there was also speculation that it might be intended to influence public opinion. However, the courtroom was noticeably silent when Combs' children entered. It could have been difficult for the 17-year-old twins, Jesse and Delilah, to listen to the allegations against their father, but they appeared composed throughout the hearing. The emotional tone of the proceedings contrasted with the previous day's hearing, where the atmosphere had been more tense. Combs, wearing a khaki jumpsuit and looking thin from his time in detention, greeted his family with warmth. He blew kisses toward them, signaling love and reassurance, despite the heavy nature of the courtroom drama. The restrained demeanor of Combs, noting that he seemed determined to present himself as strong and positive to the public, signaling that he wasn't defeated by the situation. The judge's questioning during the hearing suggested a more open-minded approach than anticipated. While Judge Subramanian did not reveal a final decision on bail, his inquiries seemed to indicate a degree of skepticism toward the prosecution's arguments. While initially doubtful about the possibility of Combs being granted bail, the proceedings left her wondering if the decision could go in his favor. With a judge throwing out his bail, it raises even more questions about what comes next for the mogul. Will he manage to navigate this latest setback, or will this time be different? We want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Diddy will get out of jail this time, or is this the turning point? Drop your comments below and let us know what you think. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates on this case and all things happening in the world of entertainment.